Thank you. And I just one thing, if I might, Ms. Butler, I have you here because going back again, looking at your testimony, and you talked about GMO contamination and what would happen in the case of a farmer who, at best, might lose that one particular crop, or in the worst case, may lose organic certification, even lose his or her livelihood.
Product and
contamination, GMO contamination became so pervasive that the export market for certain organic products just disappeared. Now, I know the Secretary of Agriculture has said this, and I have heard many times before, we have to find a way for organic and GMO to coexist. But I'm worried about where the question of liability lies. You suggested the liability should lie with the seed companies who are benefiting financially from the sale of their products. In our own state of Vermont, we had a piece of legislation several years ago passed the state legislature. As I recall it, overwhelmingly Republicans and Democrats voting for it. But it was eventually vetoed by the governor, who said it was unnecessary, would have caused manufacturers to raise prices or possibly restrict seed sales to Vermont. I mean, what do we do? You and Mr. Harris and everybody else are all playing by the rules. What do you do with this possibility of something coming from outside, something you have no control over?
It's unfortunately been a terribly divisive issue in our state and across the country, and unfortunately it often falls along organic and conventional farming lines. And I was glad to see it came up in the testimony of not just my testimony but my colleagues as well. Up until now, a lot of the responsibility for making sure there hasn't been as much opportunity for cross-pollination or contamination has rested with organic farmers. We build in buffer zones on our property between conventional and organic farmland, not only for GMO crops but also for any other use of chemical fertilizers and pesticides and other pieces. And we've been told that our responsibility is to go to our conventional neighbors, ask them if they're growing GMO crops, and noting whether they do or not, and that possibly we could plant our crops later so that they flower later so the pollination risk drops. All of it is not a good solution to us as organic farmers. It basically says, tough luck. You know, either don't grow it or take the risk that it could be cross-pollinated. With the perennial crops we're talking about now, which includes alfalfa, and I've even heard talk of clover, those are perennial crops that come back year after year. They're essential in our pastures. They're essential in our hay fields. You know, we've seeded ground on some other genetically modified crops and have learned how to either not plant or to plant in ways that we can minimize the risk. But you can't, when a bee can pollinate 10, 20 miles, you can't not cross-pollinate alfalfa. So basically you're saying to organic farmers, we're going to take alfalfa out of your toolbox to be able to utilize, and that's untenable to us. The other thing that I find really interesting is there was a really good article in the Christian Science Monitor that just came out a few days ago talking about not only the increased amount of Roundup-resistant weeds that are coming across the southeast and into the Midwest, but also the fact that farmers are starting to look at the technology, the cost of the technology, and saying maybe this isn't as much of an advantage as we thought. So rather than saying, yes, our baseline is that this is an advantage to farmers that we can't take away, let's look critically at that and see how much of advantage there is and who's really getting the benefit from that, and I don't believe it's the farmers.
Thank you. Ms. Bird, did you want to add anything to that, or anybody else?
Well, I would just add that I think the experience in Vermont and the piece of legislation that you had in Vermont, I think, was headed in the right direction, because indeed it did create some clarity in the marketplace and place the responsibility really where it belonged. And I think that's been the difficulty thus far, is that the farmers who don't benefit at all are bearing the largest burden for the cost. And so it is really about reassigning the liability so that the farmers who don't benefit aren't paying the bill.
I try never to tell the Vermont or suggest to the Vermont legislature what they should do in the vain hope that they'd return the compliment, but I think they were on the right track on this. Mr. Harris, I saw you smiling down. Did you have something you wanted to add to that?
No, sir. I think that Ms. Beeler said it very succinctly. It's really not, we don't grow alfalfa in the coastal plain of Georgia, so it's not directly the issue in my production system, but I certainly empathize with her and respect that situation.
Well, I want to thank all of you for coming in here. Unfortunately, we're down the last 2 or 3 weeks before recess for the midterm elections, and so I've had several senators, both Republicans and Democrats, tell me they want to be here, but they're on about 4 other committees at the same time. And I know their staff's been here, certainly Senator Lincoln, the chair of the committee, the same way, and I will make sure we get summaries to them. This has been well worthwhile. I've enjoyed doing this. Ms. Butler, I want to come by at some point. I was showing your testimony to my wife and come by one of these times, but there, come by the prime. Mr. Harris, I'd love to come down and visit yours. I don't get to Georgia very often, but Senator
Y'all come.
Thank you. Well, Senator Chambliss told me he'd stamp my visa and tell me I could come down. I guess you have a quota, a certain number of Northerners allowed in there periodically.
Yes. We call it the Macon-Dixon line. It goes through Macon, Georgia.
I love it. Thank you. With that, I can't top that, so we'll stand recess.
Thank you.